Congressman Adam Schiff of California joins me now. Congressman, I believe this vote is going to happen tonight. I hear a lot of Democratic politicians talking about this in extremely urgent tones. Why?
Well, I share that sense of urgency because if we don't address this effort to disenfranchise people by the enactment of various laws at the state level, and now there are over 150 new proposals by Republican legislatures to cut people off, particularly people of color, and you combine that with gerrymandered maps, you're looking at potentially another 10 years of Republican rule until demographics catch up with the gerrymander. That has been a pattern we've seen before, where after the gerrymander, Republicans seize control, improve their control, and it takes years for demographic changes to overcome that, or you need a wave election to overcome that. So, Chris, this is a break glass moment. We need to do everything we can to get this passed, to re-enfranchise people, but also to do away with politicians essentially choosing their voters instead of the other way around.
Yeah, we should say that gerrymandering is a very old practice, that we haven't always had the level of ruthless partisan polarization that we have now, so it changes it, nor have we had the sophistication with computers to be able to, like, as finely grained, do the whole thing. So it's on a sort of another level now. I wonder, I made a causal argument in the intro, right, that being able to gerrymander yourself in the majority takes away an incentive to respond to the median voter on something like the COVID package. As someone who works in that body in the House, does that scan to you?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. I think this has been, Mitch McConnell's strategy really for the last 2 decades, which is the Republican Party is increasingly a minority party, reflecting a smaller slice of America. So their only hope of maintaining power is to disenfranchise people or draw the lines in such a craven way that it doesn't allow for competition. They don't have to change their policies. They can continue to have backward regressive policies. They don't have to appeal to what their constituents want as long as they can essentially prohibit people from voting who won't vote for them and redraw districts or draw them such that one party really can't compete there. And this is exactly what they're trying to do.
I mean, the irony here, just to slightly push back on that, right, is that we just had the highest turnout election in American history. We saw states across the political spectrum due to COVID expanding access to voting. We had more votes cast than ever, and the Republicans did just fine in the House. It's not like it was some death knell. They picked up a bunch of seats. I think they actually overstate. They're more worried of the voters than they almost need to be, in a weird way.
Well, I'm not sure that that's right. I understand the point that you're making, but, they lost the Senate. They lost the presidential election. And look, we overcame those hurdles. It's not because they didn't try. They have been enacting voter restriction, new voter ID laws. They've been doing away with polling places in urban centers, et cetera, a whole range of things. We overcame it. And now they're responding to the wins in places like Georgia, the whole new raft of efforts to deter people from voting, make it harder for people to vote. So, they clearly feel that we overcame what they've done, so they're going to have to double down on those restrictive, regressive, backward-looking policies.
So here's the problem with all of these conversations. They always end up in the same terminus, annoyingly, and it's a procedural one. There's a 51-50 majority in the Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris presiding. This bill, which has nothing to do with the budget, it's not going to move in reconciliation, would require getting rid of the filibuster because there absolutely will not be 10 Republican votes. You and I both know that. So then what?
Well, look, I would hope that we can make it a case that if it's going to be, 1 or 2 bills a year where they will not permit a filibuster because it would be so disabling in the country, then they would make an exception, those that are holding out against doing away with the filibuster. But if not, then we need to find another way to use the leverage that we have with the majority of both houses and with the Oval Office to make sure this gets done, such that things the other party wants, they're going to need to put an end to this kind of gerrymandering and this kind of disenfranchisement, use the leverage that we have, use the power that we have to perfect our democracy, because at the end of the day, voting is the foundational right It's the right on which everything else hinges. Our democracy took a heck of a body blow over the last 4 years, but not just because of Donald Trump, also because of these efforts to systematically disenfranchise people and make it impossible for them to vote.
When I talk to Democratic members of Congress, particularly in the House, there's a sense a lot of them have, a lot of you have, that there's this just narrow window. Like the way that partisan polarization are functioning and this kind of anti-democratic trends of a Republican Party that's radicalizing against democracy and the institutions of the Constitution that give them an advantage, even if they're getting 45% of the vote, mean that you've got this like 2 years to kind of like save American democracy. Do you think of it in that way?
Well, I do think of it that way right now, because if we don't address this gerrymander problem, then 2 years from now, we will be dealing with gerrymander districts for the next decade. They could very well seal in Republican rule for a decade, minority Republican rule with policies non-reflective of the country, unpopular with the country, if they're allowed to get away with it. So I do feel and it's not even a 2 year window, it's a 1 year window. It's got to get done in time for these new lines to be drawn, these new rules to go into effect for that midterm, or for that next election, the midterm election.
Yeah, I wonder how much there's unity of purpose among Democrats across the ideological spectrum on that. What would you say?
Oh, I would say it's 100%. Very strong support. It's why it's really our first bill, H.R. 1, because it is so foundational. It's not the end of the story. And in fact, I have a package of democracy reforms that address other abuses we saw over the last 4 years. But there is enormously strong support for ending the gerrymander, ending these efforts at voter suppression.
Congressman Adam Schiff of California, thank you so much for joining us tonight.